have thought that I would be the one. Rhyner, sports talk. Baseball, 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 baseball.
Oh, with the big mic. Oh, okay. All right, yeah. Okay, now I get it.
We had a lightning strike, boys. What happened over there, Grego? We had a little lightning strike right outside the window.
The Texas Rangers win the World Series.
All right. Here's a tip for all these Americano League teams.
Wait, you said tip?
Yeah, tip.
Okay.
With a P.
Keep jamming.
The ticket, colon, nothing but a big Gen X jerk-off session.
This is a cool night or what?
Although somebody would hear that and go, bullshit.
I'm back, bitches.
Hey, and hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Your Dark Companion as we come to you today once again from here inside the mothership. I would be Mike Rhyner. It is Tuesday, the 22nd of October. We have the entire Your Dark Companion crew assembled, and in just a little bit, we're going to bring on a guest that a lot of people didn't think would ever happen. In fact, I didn't even think it would happen, but it did, and we'll have him along in just a bit here. But first, before we get into that, we got a few news bombs, and here to deliver those for you is Shoopy.
Well, hello. And
Hello.
we actually will have our special friend on right now as well, because we need to get his thoughts on some of these
All
news
right, well,
items.
let's do.
Because he's a
bring
man
him in.
of...
He is the great John Blake.
Heck yeah. John,
this-
how are you, sir?
Guys,
This may not be a name that you know.
this is an honor.
But for years and years, John was the media relations overlord for the Texas Baseball Rangers. And he did it with an iron hand. The job was done the way he thought it should be done, all the way around. That extended from those he worked with to those he was keeping an eye on, like us. And I didn't know what to make of him at first, but over time, I began to see that he was really good at what he did, first and foremost. And secondly, I came to appreciate that. I came to appreciate how he went about it, the way he was, and the fact that he really, really does love baseball, and he really, really does love the Rangers. And those are a couple things that we for sure have in common. How you doing, man?
I'm good, Mike. You know, I'm kind of winding it down full time. I think, you know, the Rangers have been kind enough to let me stay on in the grandiose title of senior advisor and historian. And I'll be doing some projects and tours and a lot of the archive stuff. And then I'm here in case anybody wants any advice, which who knows if that will happen. But so we'll see what happens.
You know, this is kind of hard for me to get my head around because, as I mentioned, you are very, very hands-on, or that's the way it always seemed. Now, I didn't work with you, but I was certainly on the business end of what you did a few times. And I just couldn't, when I first heard about this, I just thought, no, how can this be? Number one, what's he going to do without that gig? And number two, what are the Rangers going to do without him?
The Rangers will survive very nicely. This has kind of been a work in progress for me, and I don't know if it goes back. You know, you always kind of set things. I mean, I'm going to be 70 years old. I'm not, you know, I've been doing this full time for 46 years. And I, you know, when we moved into the new ballpark, that was kind of the first milestone. And we all know how that went. It was a pandemic, and we ended up playing, 60 games in 2020 and 30 at home in front of no fans.
That wasn't weird at all.
The highlight was we got to host the neutral site postseason. So
Yeah, I was gonna
we've
say.
seen the Dodgers, win a World Series recently. So
I got to be the crowd for the year for that season.
Right. Exactly. And it was very bizarre, as you remember.
Yeah, playing-
Chuck Morgan's 3,000th game. There was nobody there. and we held up a jersey and everything. And there's like, I think we had the pump in crowd.
Yeah, I was going to
noise.
say,
Yeah,
I was
we
just having
did.
to play like one of the 3 styles of applause that we had.
Right,
and
yeah,
just-
exactly. So it kind of started there, and then it just, I kind of, in the last 3 years, I've really have been transitioning. I kind of took myself out of traveling after the 2021 season. I was just, 2021, it was all Zooms. It was just not the same. And the last 3 years have kind of been, I've been more involved in projects. 50th anniversary in 22. We won in 23, which helped. And then this year we had we came off the World Series win. We had the All-Star game, and then we had Adrian Beltre's induction. So there was plenty to do. So I pretty much knew at the beginning of the 24 season that this was going to be it. I just, and you can probably appreciate this. I felt like, as long as I'm full-time here, I am not going to cut back. I am just, it's just kind of my nature that I felt like I had to be at every game. It was 14-hour days. And I don't know about you, but, I can't, I don't feel the same way I did physically doing this when I was 45. And, that kind of all factored into it. And I do want to do some other things. But as you mentioned at the top, I love the game, and I've always loved baseball. It's why I've worked in it for this long. It's been a lot of sacrifice, and I'll get to keep doing that.
So did you go to somebody and tell them that this is what you're thinking, this is your plan, this is what you want to do? And who did you go to?
Well, I went to ownership. Ray Davis and Neil Liebman have been great to me. They basically have told me, and a lot of people don't get to do this in this business. I've been able to kind of set it up on my own terms, so to speak, where, I've had so many friends in the business and everything that just have not been able to do this. They've been cut out. They've been let go. They've been told, that's enough. And I was kind of determined not to get to that point. And I used this, they had that little reception for me at the end of the season. I said, I think sometimes you got to read the room. And I've got Rich Rice and Angie Swan and everybody that I've tried to groom. Not groom, groom's a bad word. Tried to be a mentor to, tried to mentor, tried to, get to a point where they can do this without. And I feel pretty good about that. I think we're in the organization's, in a good place to go forward. So, and things have changed. And this, you've been in the business a long time, and I'm not trying to, but I have done a lot of things. I have been over a lot of things. A lot of things have come through our department over the years. And, the business has changed. It's become more multifaceted, where the PR guy, isn't the center of the center of an organization anymore. It's so much more. There's so many more tentacles and everything. But I think I was able to adjust, and I think they'll be in a great position going forward. So.
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I can't think of who did the job before you with the Rangers.
Well, that's a funny story. It was Bert Hawkins.
That's what I was thinking.
You remember Bert. And so the whole thing about me taking this, I was with the Orioles, Baltimore Orioles, for 6 years. The Orioles were great. We went to 2 World Series. We won 90 games 3 or 4 times. I felt like, and that was my first 6 years in baseball. And then I come down here and, we lose 99 games the first year I'm here. But I replaced Bert, and Bert was 70 years old. Bert, and at the end, Bert's notes were a poem. He would do a poem for notes. That would be the game notes for the Rangers. It would be a poem. And he didn't have a lot of help. And I remember saying to myself at that time, boy, I cannot imagine doing this until I'm 70 years old. And, here I am. Yeah. And, Bert's last game, I don't know if you remember this, last game of the 1984 season, I was down there. I had not started, but I was down there, looking around for housing and everything. And Mike Witt pitched a perfect game in an hour and 46 minutes.
Yes,
so, I turned to Tim Kirkchin. I said, "Is it always like this here in Texas?" But Bert, and I was able to create a real media relations department at the time. Mike Stone was the president of the team, and Tom Grieve had just become the GM. And they really, Texas and Baltimore had a really good reputation. I mean, I had a great boss who taught me a lot about how to do media relations in baseball, how to run a PR department, as we called it in those days. And I was able to take all of that. They gave me the resources here, and I was able to really create something, out of nothing. And the one thing I didn't know when I got down here was how I just didn't have the knowledge that football was so powerful here. And the Rangers were not good, as you knew in the early 80s. It was kind of a joke. It was, and, there was a lot to do, but I went to work and, here we are 40 years later.
I was going to say that does kind of provide a nice little segue into some news talk, because I did want to. We haven't really gotten a chance to talk about the Jerry Jones comments, and I want to be careful with. I know that you still work for the Rangers and have the connection with the fan and all that, but I am kind of curious. I don't think there's a true one-to-one comparison, because Jerry's so singular, but handling a blow up like that, where, essentially threatened, the radio host jobs, the guys at the Fan. And I'm guessing you haven't quite dealt with anything like that. Oh, I've
dealt with that. But, I mean, Mike remembers Eddie Childs. I mean, yeah. I dealt with Eddie Childs when Eddie Childs who was our owner from about 1980 to 1989. And he would drive over to WBAP and, threaten. And it was just when Galloway was starting Sports at 6 and all of that. So yes, I am very well aware. Okay. I've dealt with that.
I was gonna say, I guess you're able to keep it in house a little bit better, since the owner isn't also the general manager and all that stuff. But it's just insane that it wound up, that conversation went that way. And I'm trying to think too, Shoopy, if you've dealt with anything.
Not like that.
Not like that.
I haven't.
But having your job threatened, I know John's kind of yelled at you a couple times. And
yeah, he has.
Stuff like that.
But I'm in the ranks of many that has been yelled at by John.
It's a slippery slope when you're the rights holder. I'm not going to, deny that. And as I said, back in the 80s, WBAP did the Rangers games until 1994. So we had that a little bit, and it did kind of, raise its head when the advent of talk radio came in basically the mid 80s, I would guess, right, Mike? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's when you would kind of Brad Sham had a show, but I mean, Galloway started Sports at 6. Well, Dan Flanagan, if you remember, was on before. But Randy's kind of approach, and yes, it raised its and we would have meetings and that kind of thing. It never got to that point kind of on the air, but it is a slippery slope. It really is. And, with broadcasters and everything else. So again, I think, I've never had an owner who was quite out there as much or whatever, but I have had situations like that, and it can be a little challenging.
I would imagine.
I don't think my thoughts have been fully formulated on this yet, but the way I see it, everybody in that scenario was pretty much acting the way that they were supposed to. Mm-hmm. I don't think those guys on the Fan did anything wrong. I don't think any question that they asked was out of line. But Jerry is the rights. They are the rights holders, and if Jerry wants to deal with them in the way that he did, then I don't think he was terribly out of line for that. He was just kind of acting the way that he had an option to act.
Isn't this kind of like the Ben and Skin origin story with Mark Cuban?
Yeah, where he practically tried to fire Ben and Skin from the post-game show on the ticket, and it wound up, thankfully, where Dan Bennett, the big boss at the ticket, and Jeff Catlin, the program director, had Norm Hitzges sit down, listen to everything Ben and Skin said in the post-game show, and Norm basically just said, no, this is all accurate, this is all true, there's no reason to...
These guys didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, they didn't do anything wrong. So there's at least a little bit more flexibility, I guess, with some of the owners. But yeah, and I think even with Jerry, some of it was just, I think, hey, we got the bye week coming up. We got potentially 2 weeks out of the spotlight until the next game. So
that's
maybe stir things up a little, because he seemed like he was kind of ready to go and fire away from the start.
Well, that's the other thing for me, though. The bye week was coming up, and it was well positioned for the whole thing to blow over.
Yeah.
And then it looks like, judging from what we see right now, that that's pretty much what's happened.
Yeah.
That the whole thing is blown over, and it's time for a new story.
Yeah. Well played by Jerry. Then in a little bit more fun news, American Airlines is working on a system to make an audible noise that will sound whenever a passenger tries to move and get in on an earlier gate or earlier boarding number. So, say you're in Group C and you try to hop into Group A, there'll be some sort of a noise.
Times it's not even funny.
You've tried that?
I don't like that.
I've done it.
Yeah.
If I'm in 5, I always try to get into 4 or 3. It's.
I was kind of wondering with you, because you seem like you're pretty, not necessarily a rule follower, but you tend to seem like you respect.
Yeah, but as you get older, if you've got carry-on, you get more nervous about the carry-on.
Right.
You don't kind of take it with a grain of salt as much. So you got to get ahead.
Yeah, I was just kind of curious, especially with as many flights that you've had to deal with over the years and all that professionally, and then when you do get a chance to, take a personal vacation or something. Okay, that does make more sense. That you're just
and the problem is when you work for a baseball team, you fly charter all the time, so you don't get any miles.
Right.
So, you have to build your miles up, and maybe that'll be a nice part of retirement. Maybe I'll get into Group 2 or 3 or something. It'll be easier on American.
Yeah. Now, Shoopy did have a question before we started, just asking if boarding groups are even needed anymore, or is it just kind of go with maybe a little bit closer I guess Southwest Airlines model is more about seating, but just kind of do away with boarding groups. Like if you're there first, then
I never have
get
understood.
on the damn plane.
I never have understood the purpose or the concept behind them myself.
We all know it's a status thing. You feel important when you're in Group A and Group 1, more important than you feel in Group 5 and Group D.
It is a pretty cool feeling.
It used to be a lot easier when they just boarded from the back to the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You remember those days?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Why don't they I've always wondered why they don't do that still. It makes no sense to group the first class passengers first. I know that's weird to say, but it just makes no sense.
You get to go first.
See, that's stupid.
It's probably a status thing.
Status.
Definitely status.
Calling it status.
I'm old enough that where teams used to fly commercial. And we used to actually fly commercial. And the thing was, really, you did it till the early 90s, believe it or not. On if you had a day game someplace, you would fly commercial after the game. Ooh. And it led to some real angst if you played extra innings and you missed the flight or whatever. But the big thing was the CBA called for the middle seats. The middle seats were open, right? So for the team, player was in a whole team. Me too. Was in you had a window or an aisle, and these flights that were oversold. These passengers would get on, and they would see all these open middle seats, and they would go ballistic. We would just kind of sit there and say, "Oh, this is a CBA requirement. Players can't sit 3 across." So yeah, we flew commercial.
Oh my gosh.
When I played at TCU, we were commercial. The only 3 teams that were commercial were us, the soccer team, I think the equestrian team, and swimming. And it was the worst, especially when you saw the basketball team getting off a private jet. And you're just like, I just sat at Southwest Airlines for 4 hours. This is stupid. It also reminds me of my minor league baseball days when the teams had to arrive and they were all pissy because they were on a Southwest flight.
Or a bus.
Or a bus for 15 hours.
Oh,
Could always be worse, John.
Yep.
One last thing. With the Mavs and Stars kind of getting their streaming services going, like, the Mavs, I guess, now are offering a bundle with their streaming that you have to pay for, even though they've also got the over-the-air thing. I'm very curious how that's supposed to work and why even do that when you already got the over-the-air set up. Do y'all understand that?
No, not really, but I'm worried about the antenna.
Uh-oh.
I fear the antenna.
It's basically you've got to, and we're going through this now, obviously. You guys have seen, we're breaking away from what, FanDuel now? I guess the FanDuel
right,
Sports
I think that starts on the 20th.
West, yes, as of yesterday. But it's all about how you're going to deliver content to the different people. Like for me, I'm still a cable guy. I mean, I have cable, and that's how I like to watch the Rangers. But, and I can't imagine watching everything like this. I just, but the whole generation is getting there, and you're going to have to balance it. And that's what we're trying to do now. We're trying to look at, okay, what's the best fit? Is it, do you do an over-the-air piece? Do you just a linear cable type piece? And do you have a streaming piece? And that's what we're trying to work through now. We're trying to get the games to more people. And yes, there's going to be, certainly there's a cost involved in several of those models, but it's a fascinating time to see how, games and content are going to be delivered to the different generations, so to speak.
Yeah, are you going to miss being directly involved in all that?
I have tried to distance myself from that some this year because I knew this was coming. So
nice.
So if you're not involved in it, who is?
People smarter than myself on broadcasting issues. Again, I mentioned Angie Swin at the top. She's done broadcasting for us for a long time, and we'll be fine.
Yeah,
they'll be fine.
Yeah. So when you first came down to let's see, you're from where originally?
I'm from Massachusetts, and then I went to college in Washington at Georgetown, and I worked there for a couple of years, and I went to work for the Baltimore Orioles in May of 1979.
When you made your way down to this part of the world, was it kind of a culture shock for you?
A little bit, but I mean, I'd been here on road trips, so at least I'd seen the ballpark, which was not a temple, as you know, old Arlington Stadium.
No, it was not. The temple was yet to come.
It was, I had been around the business enough, and it was really a nice change. I mean, it was giving me an opportunity, like I said, to run a department. There weren't a whole, at that point. 1984, there were 24 teams, I guess. So that the head jobs didn't come along that often, right? Mm-hmm. It was hard to find it. So, but it became, like I mentioned a little bit before, the football thing. I guess I just wasn't quite as aware as what a stranglehold it had on those. And, the Stars weren't here then. Mm-hmm. The Mavericks had been here about 4 years. Mm-hmm. So it was still very much a football market. And that's what we had to tackle right away. So to pardon the pun, that's what we had to tackle right away.
Was it difficult for you to get people of the organization to let you do the job the way you wanted to do it, the way you thought it should be done?
Not really. I mean, again, I was coming from an organization, the Orioles had a really good reputation in baseball. And I think, like I said, I think Mike Stone and Tom Greven, they knew they needed help.
Yeah.
In the PR area and everything. And I got helped a lot by, I think, when we hired Bobby Valentine, and, people have different opinions on Bobby's tenure in Texas, but he was a tremendous ambassador for the club. I mean, he opened restaurants, he was out in the community all the time. And that really, to me, was was the point where you started to see the trend kind of shifting a little bit. You know, we were able to kind of start to make a mark. And then obviously when we signed Nolan Ryan before the 89 season, that kind of took it to a new level. So, but those years were, you were around in the media in those years, and the reputation of the Rangers in the mid 80s there.
Right.
It was not great.
No, it was not good.
And maybe I didn't realize quite as I came, because I was coming from a really good team that was in the contention every year. But we were able to kind of build it up. And, the 86 team, if you remember, we overachieved.
Yes.
We had Ruben Sierra and Pete and that was fun. And then, and we were able to kind of start moving the needle, I think.
Yeah. It was not all a disaster.
Right.
It was not all 1972 all over again.
Right.
Or anything like that.
And even in those days, Mike, I think people, the stigma of never getting to the playoffs, and it was another 10 years before we did, it was real. I mean, because the Cowboys were so successful in that period.
Yeah, it was a given every year that they were going to get to the playoffs.
Right, and you got compared. That was the kind of the measuring stick for professional sports in Dallas, Fort Worth, or whatever, and it was hard.
What did getting the ballpark in Arlington do for the franchise?
Oh, and I contend this is probably one of the biggest things that moved the franchise. And just stepping back a little bit, it really started with Nolan. Signing Nolan. I think the sale to the Bush, President Bush, Rusty Rose ownership group, that and Tom Schiefer coming in and seeing and having a dream that a new ballpark, what it would do to the area. And that to me was a total game changer. The first day, I remember Tom Grieve and I walked in there. We were getting back from spring training and everything. And you had to kind of pinch yourselves that was the ballpark, that was going to be your new home starting, in April of 1994. Because, the stories of Arlington Stadium, if people, a lot of people, certainly several generations who never experienced a game there. One of the things that's amazing is if we had a rain delay, we had no concourses. Okay, so if we had if we had a rain delay, you had to go out and sit in your car. You had to leave the ballpark and go out and sit in your car. We had this little, very small concourse behind the plate. But can you imagine all the revenue you lost from beer and hot dogs and food? It was amazing.
I mean, there was very little covered area at all.
No, it was, and once we signed Nolan, it really became apparent because all of his starts would sell out, right? But our incremental revenue. There were 20,000 steel bleacher seats in the outfield. They went from foul pole to foul pole, and that was done basically because, the franchise was announced moving to Texas in September of 1971. The American League said, well, you got to add, 20,000 seats to get this stadium up to league requirements for attendance before the 72 season. Easiest thing to do was just put in 20,000 bleacher seats, right?
Great in that 100-degree weather.
Right. So when Nolan would pitch and we'd have a sellout, we'd sell those 20,000 bleacher seats. Those seats were like $4 a piece. So you're making, we made an extra $80,000 tonight on Nolan's start. It just wasn't viable. So getting the stadium, and I think even keeping it in Arlington, I think that was huge. That they were able to work out the deal with the city and the partnership, with Mayor Richard Green and Tom Vandergriff involved. But just the design, and that stadium was so well received when we moved in, and it was perfect. The Texas architecture, the steel, all the little touches that Tom Schiefer and the architects came up with. It was perfect, except for one thing, which I'm sure you're going to talk about in a little bit. But I have such great memories from that stadium, and that changed the course, I think, of how I know it internally how we viewed ourselves. I mean, we were big league now.
Yeah. I know that that when the new place was built, I felt like the ballpark had at least, and this is probably a very low estimate, at least 10 good years left in it. And yet here they were leaving that and going across the street to a new one. But at the same time, I understand why they did it, because I mean, the planet is getting warmer. I don't care what anybody says. And the masses are losing their appetite for going to games at night and sitting out there when it's a 3-2 game in the bottom of the fifth inning. It's 94 degrees and it's 9:30 at night. You know,
Right.
they were losing their appetite for that.
Right. The other thing is, and this is what changed dramatically from when the ballpark opened, you know, over the next few years. You know, the CBA now and the television, we used to play all night games. You know,
Yeah,
I mean,
yes.
we used to play even Sunday nights.
Yes.
We would play all night games, and ESPN at the time, they would grandfather us. I mean, once Sunday night baseball came in the early 90s, I guess, they grandfathered us, said you could play at night, you're the backup game. Well, at some point they decided you can't play at night anymore. I mean, it's an exclusive game. So you had to play, Rangers had to play Sunday afternoons in the summer. And then the CBA comes in with getaway days, you know, where you have to now play a day game if you're flying over 90 minutes or whatever. And I think that had a lot to do with it. We were playing so many more day games too in that ballpark. And the press box, we didn't have to worry. We were behind glass. It was air conditioned.
It was nice up there.
It was very nice. The only problem was it sounded like a tomb, so we had to pump in crowd noise to give it a little atmosphere. But I couldn't, you know, the fans, it was, as the years went on, it was just so hard. And in good years, you know, 2010, 2011,
Yeah.
you might put up with that a little more. But, you know, in years that weren't so good, and you're right, people would just leave.
Yeah, seeing those left field stands just empty,
Right. I
basically. 'cause
remember
you would
right.
bake out
Tom
there.
Grieve told me, he said, why do we need a new ballpark? He kept telling me that. And then he said he took his grandkids one day to a game on like a Sunday or whatnot, and they lasted like 2 innings. I mean, it was, you know, and he said, now I know why they need a new ballpark.
Yeah. You know, you mentioned Nolan Ryan a second ago. He was the biggest star the Rangers ever had. And I know that part of your job was kind of getting next to the big stars of the franchise and handling them. And you were kind of that guy with Nolan. And guys like that do require a few special accommodations, but I did know that you and he were probably were pretty close and probably still are.
Yeah, that was, I think that was one of, as you look back on highlights and relationships and everything, that's what it means to me, the different players and the guys that you worked with. And Nolan was the best, you know, and again, I think it's hard for people to realize how big Nolan was. You know, I mean, you know, in terms of lines at the hotels for autographs and just all the interview requests, because there was so much more media in those days in terms of people wanting to do things. That's a lot of the difference today. The whole media scheme has changed so much. But the thing with Nolan was, you know, he had a very rigorous, very schedule. I mean, and it was, you know, the day after he pitched, you know, he did all of his workout and everything. And there were only certain times between starts where we would do things, but he was great at doing them. And he had a knack for making, you know, even a radio guy from Temple or whatever feel as important as he did, you know, not Fox in those days, but whatever, you know,
right.
the New York Times or whatever. And that was the great thing about him. He never changed. But it was a lot. I mean, on the road, it was hard. And it was a period where, you know, you guys probably know, I mean, people were naming their kids Nolan or Ryan. And we would get requests all the time on the road. You know, my 2-year-old is named for Nolan Ryan. Will he meet him? And Nolan was so great about it. You know, I have people, we were in Minnesota. I had this mother call who lived in North Dakota. We want to bring our son to have a picture with Nolan. And those kind of things, it just required a lot of scheduling. But he was great. And just watching, you never knew what you were going to see. And especially in 89, 90, and 91. He could throw a no-hitter. You know, you never knew. I mean, every start was must-see.
Right.
You know, at the ballpark.
Yep. It was really incredible having somebody like that around here because the Rangers had never had a guy like that. I mean, there aren't many, but Rangers had never had anything really terribly even close to that. They had a lot of good players come through here, but as far as somebody like him with the cred that he brought to the franchise, that's another thing.
Right.
I mean, he did make the franchise credible.
We had never had anybody that had any national media, you know, that we were ever getting any attention on. And, you know, when his 5,000 strikeout, we were able to create, you know, quite a frenzy on that in August of 1989. And it was really, and we utilized that. Like you said, it gave the franchise credibility. And then, you know, the thing for me was, you know, and then being able to work with him again in a second life, really.
Yeah.
You know, I was up in Boston. I was working for the Red Sox. You know, we just won the World Series in 2007. And he gets the job as president in February of 2008. And I had no intention of, I mean, I was happy with the Red Sox. And, you know, he called and, you know, at the end of the 2008 season, it made sense for me to come back. My daughter was very happy. I mean, my kids were Texans, and it was moving from that. You talk about the culture and everything. Moving from Texas to Massachusetts when you're in high school is really hard.
Yeah.
So
I can see that.
So she was happy when we moved back, and I did it for some of that, but I also did it for the chance to be able to work with Nolan Ryan, and it was a great 5 or 6 years when he was running the club.
Kind of going back though to when Nolan did join, I know you worked a little bit with like Cal Ripken with the Orioles and stuff like that, but how much of a difference was that for you? You know, it's like probably drinking from a fire hose all of a sudden. You know, I'm not saying the job was easy before.
The only player and we've had a lot of good players over the years. The only player in terms of the media frenzy and everything that compares with Nolan with the Rangers is Josh Hamilton. And that was for a number of other reasons sometimes, but the guy was, you know, when he was healthy, when he was at his peak, he was unbelievable. And the demands and everything, those are really the two players here. David Ortiz in Boston, and you know, guys like that. Manny Ramirez, who was a lot of work. But the two players for the Rangers, you know, for different reasons, really, right? But Nolan, with the Texas connection and him being a Texan, I think had a lot to do with it too. But those two players over the time are the two guys that I would say are the two players that media gravitated the most towards, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes.
And it was for different reasons, kind of, but you were both kind of in awe of their on-field abilities.
But for you, I guess, how much did it change your job? Like, I'm sure your days were crazy kind of already before Nolan came in when you were working for the Rangers, those first 8 years or so. But then all of a sudden, Nolan comes in, and it's got to just skyrocket everything.
It was a lot, but it was, you know, it was great. I mean, you know, the Rangers people cared. You know, it's like that was what was so much fun about it. If you're in PR or whatever, you want people to, you know, to care about your franchise, hopefully for the right reasons. But it makes coming to work so much more enjoyable and fun. It just lifts you up. So I had no problem with it.
All right, I got a few favorites here I want to ask you about. Now, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on anybody, But of all the ownership groups the Rangers have had, which was your favorite?
I'll answer that this way, okay? Because I think the ownership group we have now has been by far the most successful, ownership groups here over the years, and you've been around a long time. Ranger ownership groups tended to fall into financial distress. And not, and for the reasons they would normally sell the ball club, right?
Right.
That's what Eddie Childs did. The Bush Rose group, they had a lot of momentum going. We built a new ballpark in 94, and then in August of 1994, there was the strike, and it kind of knocked everything out.
Mm-hmm.
And George Bush decides he wants to run for governor. So he gets out, and they end up selling to Tom Hicks, and we know how that worked out at the end. We were in bankruptcy for well over a year. Major League Baseball ran the team. And so this ownership group, which run by Ray Davis, has put this franchise in a position to be successful and to be in contention and to have the wherewithal to do it for many years. I mean, you look at what the Arlington Entertainment District is now compared to what it was 8 years ago. It is astounding in terms of hotels, Texas Live, being able to repurpose what is now Choctaw Stadium. We like to call it the ballpark in Arlington, but
it's Choctaw Stadium.
But able to repurpose that and everything, and that's all a tribute to this ownership group. So saying that, it was a lot of fun working for George Bush and Tom Schieffer.
Yeah.
And it was early, again, they were taking it, and they were kind of the ones I think that lifted it up to the point where, Tom Hicks was interested in buying it at the time for a large price of $250 million in 1998. They got the ballpark built, and it was fun working for those guys.
Yeah.
It really was. Tom could be tough. Tom was a tough, he was a tough guy to work for, but he loved the game. I mean, and that was part of it. But again, so that's the way I would answer this question, because I think what Ray Davis and this ownership group has accomplished is what you really need today in professional sports to be successful. I mean, it has become such a huge financial situation.
The only thing that bothers me about this group is I don't know these guys. I mean, these guys really stay out of view. You mentioned Neil Liebman, and I know who he is, but I'll bet the vast majority of people out there listening to this aren't going to know him.
Well, that's Ray.
And I realize it's their prerogative.
Right. It's their prerogative. And, early on in the ownership group, Nolan was kind of the face of the group. And then Nolan left, and it became more on the baseball people, right? John Daniels really kind of became the face of the franchise, which in some ways was not totally fair, but Ray does not like to do interviews. He, and in a market where certainly in basketball and football, the owners have been very much out there for years. It's a different dynamic. In some ways, it makes my job easier, we were able to kind of, keep the messages kind of online. I think Chris Young, now that he has his extension and everything, I think you'll see him become more kind of the face of the franchise. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I mean, when you're a baseball team, that's the case.
Yeah. Favorite player?
That's a tough question for me. I've had a lot over the years. I had some in Baltimore, which helped me early on. And for me, favorite player, probably I'm a little biased on guys that were cooperative and everything,
Of course.
and that would do would do interviews and that would be available, at tough times.
Right.
Charlie Huff is one of my all-time favorites here.
Jose Canseco.
Charlie Huff was one of my all-time favorites here. Will Clark could be a little prickly, as you were around the ticket when we had the Will Clark situation.
Yes, I was. I was.
But, those kind of guys were for the most part, stand-up guys. And I've been very lucky to start with guys like Charlie, and those teams of the 90s were, they were great. The Mark McLemores and Rusty Greers and, Mickey Tettletons and, guys that were great guys. And then obviously Michael Young, one of the all-time greats who suffered through a lot of years, and was so much fun to see him, be able to win in 10 and 11 and those kind of things. And then, and Adrian comes in, and I have really, Adrian at the start was a little bit, he was a little bit reticent to do, but he became the real team leader of that team. And I've had so much fun working with Adrian through the Hall of Fame stuff, and now we're building we're gonna put a statue up, and he has been great. But it's tough because there've been so many guys. The list of favorites is so much longer than the list of guys who, were not so good.
Yeah.
But that's again, it's just been a lot of fun dealing with so many different types of guys over the years. But again, the players for me are guys that, okay, you don't win, you're out there, you stand up, you defend your teammates, and it's not all about you. And that's kind of the way that's kind of the way I've gravitated.
Manager?
Another tough one, Mike. Because
I didn't say this was going to be easy, John.
They all have their qualities. I think probably Johnny Oates. I mean, just because of what he did, and again, Johnny could be tough. I mean, I'm not saying again that Johnny was fair, and there were times when Johnny would, he would like light up a reporter or something, but he always felt bad about it.
Yeah.
I remember one day in the old ballpark, he lit up poor George Reba, who was one of the nicest people in the world doing television after a game. And he came to me after, and he was so apologetic and everything, but he cared so much. And just the way he put, those teams, the way the players would play for him, and we won for the first time with him, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, so I think there was that. Johnny was a real favorite of mine, but Bobby, Bobby wore out his welcome. It was a little rough at the end, but he did so much for the franchise. And Wash. I mean, Wash. Look what Wash did here, and the way he got this team to play and everything, and so. And it's been interesting. I'm not as, again, I've kind of stepped away from the day-to-day, and it's one of the things I told Rich. I said one of the things that I'm a little jealous of here is that you get to deal with Bruce Bochy, every single day, a Hall of Fame manager and everything. And I've been fortunate. The first manager I had was Earl Weaver in Baltimore, Hall of Famer. In Boston, I worked with Terry Francona, who's going to be a Hall of Famer. Mm-hmm. So every manager, that I've worked with is different, but Johnny will always hold kind of a special place for me because it was the first time we won. I felt like we kind of did it together.
Yeah. Is there a player that you would have liked to have gotten to know a little bit better than you did?
Wow. Jose Canseco.
Jose Canseco was, he was
That's
different. He was different, but he wasn't that bad here. I mean, he really
seemed like
he really wasn't.
Yeah. Reasonably
he had it just again. It was an era where, and I'm not avoiding your question, but it was an era where we had. Can you imagine on the same team we had like Jose Canseco, Nolan Ryan, Julio Franco, Rafael Palmeiro, Juan Gonzalez, Von Rodriguez, Kevin Brown, Kenny Rogers, and we didn't win. You know, I mean, that's the amazing, you know, you talk about a lot of talent and you didn't really win. I don't know. I feel like, you know, most of the guys, you know, I've had a pretty good relationship with over the years. I mean, some guys were more standoffish than others. I think as I got older, it was good and bad. You know, when you're young, and again, players were different in those days. Mm-hmm. I mean, players would give you grief. I mean, you know, the PR guy would be the, you know, Charlie was one of the great needlers of all time. But it was all in good nature for the most part, right? Players today don't do that. I mean, and yes, I'm old and they look at me like I'm their grandfather. So I'm probably not going to get a lot of grief from them, but you know, you kind of enjoyed that give and take. Will was great at that. One of the great guys at that was Billy Ripken. He may have been the all-time ball buster of any player I have ever worked with. And we had him here twice. I knew him in Baltimore because he was a minor leaguer then. And he's still, you know, he and Will are still, I'll see Will or Billy to this day, and it's like, it doesn't really matter. It's the same. You know, they just start in on you again. You don't have guys like that anymore. Yeah. But in terms of knowing somebody better, you know, I think I knew, you know, Kenny Rogers pretty well, and his idiosyncrasies and everything. Maybe Kenny a little bit, and Kenny had, you know, several. Again, it seems like Rangers. If you're a Ranger once, you got a real good chance to be a Ranger twice or a Ranger 3 times because they just do seem to come back. And, you know, watching Kenny kind of, you know, and I was not here when he hit the cameraman in 2005. I was gone then. But to see that was sad and to wish, but he had a great career. He won 125 games.
That was so out of character for, I mean, like, we don't really know these guys, but we're around them. We kind of get a little bit of a vibe about their personality and everything. And that was way out of character from anything.
Right. And he pushed a reporter a couple of years. And maybe, you know, I wish I'd been able to get into Kenny's head a little bit more to help him a little bit more. But, you know, we had to talk him into going into the Hall of Fame. So, I mean, you know, that was... But over the years, it's, you know, I've always tried to, the other thing about it is, you know, there is a wall, right? I mean, and you can't cross that wall. I've never tried to be real buddy with players because there is that professional relationship. And, you know, sooner or later, for the most part, it's not going to end well with a player. You're going to trade him, you're going to release him, you know, so you do have to kind of separate. And, you know, I've been doing this so long that, you know, back in the 70s, what an assistant PR director was making was not that much different than what a player was making. But, you know, as the years went on and that salary dichotomy or whatever you will becomes larger and larger, it did change the dynamic. But that's kind of been always the way I've kind of handled it.
Was there a team that surprised you?
A Ranger team?
Yeah, a Ranger team that surprised you.
Yeah, there are probably a couple. 1986, you know, and I mentioned that earlier. I mean, we lost 99 games in 1985. We were bad. I mean, it was a bad team. A lot of washed up veteran guys, you know, Bird Hooten and you know, Cliff Johnson. And it was not a good team.
Oh.
Dave Stewart was on that team, if you remember.
Yep.
And Doug Rader wouldn't let him throw his split finger. We ended up trading him for a second tier reliever. And what does Stu go on? He goes on and wins 20 games 6 times with the A's. When La Russa lets him throw the split finger. But the '86 team, Incaviglia made the team out of spring training. The pitching, we had young pitching. We had Bobby Witt, Edwin Correa. Was a Jose Guzman anchored with Charlie, and then you had Ruben Sierra coming up and Larry Peng. That was one of the more, and we finished second in the division. We were in it really until the last 2 weeks of the season. That was one of the more fun years I ever had. And I remember somebody telling me when that season was over, they said, it's never going to be as good with this team as it was this year. And they were right. I mean, we had injuries, and Edwin Correa was a Seventh-day Adventist and decided he couldn't pitch from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, which fouled up the rotation. We had all these things happen, and it was never the same. So the '86 team, for me, was one of those teams. And I guess the other team would be that '96 team, the first team when we won. Because, again, we were coming off, '94 was a strike. '95, was Johnny Oates' first year. We finished 74 and 70. If you remember, that year started with the strike. We were using replacement players in spring training, and it was a disaster. And there was no real indication that we were going to be that good in '96. And we signed Kenny Hill. Juan comes on, gangbusters. And it was a great group. We had Tettleton, we had Will Clark, and we got enough pitching. We signed Mike Henneman. We got John Burkett in the middle of the season. Mm-hmm. And I think those 2 years, I mean, it's kind of funny they're 10 years apart, but probably those 2 years for me, were years where you don't, and those are the kind of years that are the most fun. We have no expectations and you overachieve. The fans get behind it. The media gets behind it. And then once you do that, then that bar goes way up.
Well, John, this has really been fun, and I can scarcely think of a better way to wrap things up than with some Grube's grenades.
Yes.
Explain the concept, Shoopy.
Basically, I throw out a random topic, and you talk about it, John.
Oh,
and
wow,
Shoopy.
okay.
So I'd like to know what you think about candied apples.
I've never been a fan of candy apples, Grubes. They're too sweet. They fall off the stick. So I don't think I have ever bought a candied apple at a fair or a carnival or anything else. To me, an apple is what you pick off a tree and you eat it.
Can I just say one thing about this?
You better.
I like the concept of candied apples. Like, it looks appealing and looks like it might be, something worthwhile. But it becomes troublesome very fast. And it loses its allure for me very fast. And I rarely get all the way through one.
Wait, so if it's just pick off a tree and eat it, so no apple pie or anything like that?
Well, I love apple pie.
Okay.
But I'm from New England. We used to go pick apples in the fall and everything. Well,
you just don't dip them in caramel.
Correct.
That's fair enough. All right, as a now Texan, what do you think about boots?
I have never worn a pair of boots. And I have a lot. My kids wear them. My wife wears them. I've just never gotten into them. I mean, I don't ride horses, right? So I've never really had a reason to do it. So I know it's very weird. I know it's weird, and like we get all these great boots, these commemorative boots for winning the World Series and everything like that, but they just kind of sit in my closet.
How many pairs of boots would you have then?
I got about 5.
And you've never worn a pair ever?
Nope.
Not even for fun?
Not since I went to a dude ranch when I was about 12 years old in Arizona. That was probably the last time, and I did have to ride horses then.
I'm right there with you, John. I don't do boots. I don't have any. The only time I've ever had that I've ever gone with the program was one time I was playing drums in a country band, and they insisted that everybody wear boots. So, okay, I suffered through that, but it was awful.
They must have been so uncomfortable if it was the first time you wore them.
Trying to drum in boots?
That sounds terrible.
Not fun.
Broken in?
Not fun.
I just don't see how people wear them around here in the summer. When
I don't either.
You know, and you go to football, SMU or TCU football games, and everybody's wearing boots, for a day game, and it's 95 degrees, and not for me.
You got to wear the cutoff jeans, John.
That's another.
You haven't worn those either?
No.
All
No
right, John,
jorts.
One more for you. Do you have any hidden talents?
Probably not. I can name the presidents of the United States backwards and forwards.
That's a talent.
Okay. I think that's one of Shoopy's skills too. Maybe I'll trade off. I didn't know about this, John.
Presidential history is kind of my hobby. This is one of the things I want to do. I want to drive around the country and see the presidential libraries I haven't seen, see birthplaces. I've got a list of one, and I volunteer. I volunteered for 11 years as a docent at the Bush Library at SMU. So this is one of my hobbies or whatever. It's kind of a nice diversion from baseball. So
Nice.
Well, shall we see if we can do it? Shall we
Go for it.
alternate?
Yeah. Number one.
You want to go first?
you want George Washington,
John Adams,
Thomas Jefferson,
James Madison,
James Monroe,
John Quincy Adams,
Andrew Jackson.
Oh, God.
Oh, God, this is awful.
Ooh,
It's embarrassing.
you want me to tell you?
Yeah, tell me.
Martin Van Buren.
That's right, Martin Van Buren.
Start yelling at him every time he misses
I'm used
one.
to rattling them off. I've never done this before.
You got to know him. You got to know him.
William Henry Harrison,
John Tyler,
James Polk,
Zachary Taylor,
Millard Fillmore,
Franklin Pierce,
James Buchanan,
Abraham Lincoln,
Andrew Johnson,
U.S. Grant,
Rutherford B. Hayes,
Chester Arthur.
James A. Garfield, before Chester A. Arthur.
Oh, screw me. Okay, Garfield.
Arthur was 21.
Arthur. So 22 is to me. Cleveland.
Cleveland, Benjamin Harrison,
Cleveland again.
William McKinley, 26. Oh, this is easy. Rough Rider.
Goofy.
I just
Oh, God.
In Frisco.
I'm not good today.
Theodore Roosevelt,
Okay, yes. Theodore Roosevelt.
William Howard Taft,
Not Harding. Harding's 29. 28 is, oh, God. Who is it, Shoopy?
Woodrow Wilson,
Yes, Woodrow Wilson.
then Harding,
Yeah, then Harding. And then Coolidge,
Coolidge, then Herbert Hoover,
Roosevelt,
Truman,
Eisenhower,
Kennedy,
and on we go. Johnson,
Johnson, Nixon,
Ford,
Carter,
these Reagan,
Reagan, right, Bush,
who? Clinton. Yeah.
right, Clinton, then G.W. Bush, and then you should be able to get the next one.
No. Yeah, the new guy, Obama.
Obama, Trump, and Biden. Mm-hmm. That's it.
John,
you
who
go.
are you voting for? Just kidding.
Well, that was a mess.
So I've been able to do that since the third grade.
Now I can do it backwards for us.
I could do it too, but that was a mess. I did.
Yeah.
I did get thrown
It was
off.
Because you can.
Because I knew I'd met my match here.
Yeah, it's intimidating.
The great thing about presidential history is the connection it has with baseball. I mean, there is so much connection with baseball and presidents throwing out first pitches,
Sure.
and everything like that. So it's been fun. We had an exhibit at the Bush Library in 2015. It was presidents in baseball. It was so much fun to help them work on that.
That's awesome. Can I ask what a docent is real quick?
It's a volunteer basically.
just wanted to
I
check.
don't get paid for this, but it's a choice. It's a combination of customer service and education of the different exhibits.
Nice. Well, John, I must tell you this. When I heard you were retiring, or stepping back, as it were, I thought, I really should get him on the podcast. But I thought, no, he would never do something like that. And I went back and forth about it for probably about 4 or 5 days. And finally I said, all right, screw it. I'm just going to ask. The worst that can happen is he's going to tell me, no, Mike, I'm not into that. But you didn't tell me that. You told me that you would love to do it. I believe your words were you would be honored to do it.
To do it with you has been an honor. Yes.
Well, it's an honor to have you out here, man. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I mean, I enjoyed talking about the Rangers and somebody who's knowledgeable about our history and everything, because it means a big deal. And sometimes I don't realize that, over the time I've worked, you have so much tunnel vision doing this job. You don't realize how much the Rangers mean to so many people. And then you saw it with that parade last year.
Yes.
After we won, that was it really kind of showed. And I think it's important to talk about it.
I know that seeing that final call, strike 3, where that pitch was thrown and it was a very marginal call, and just for a tick, everything stopped. And the guys was looking at the umpire, and the umpire just kind of seemed to think for a second, okay, should I ring this guy up and get this over with or not? And finally he did it, and boom. I was propelled into the greatest moment of my sports life, which will never be topped. Never. And you were a part of getting it there, man, and I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you for the time. And again, I mean, one thing quick, when you saw it, I didn't. I was, when you're the PR guy, I have never seen the final pitch of the 3 World Series teams that I've won, 83, Baltimore, 07 with the Red Sox, because you're behind the dugout getting ready to run out on the field, right? So you secure the crowd for me. And it was so much relief that I felt for so many people when I heard that behind the dugout. It was a much different feeling than I had in 2011 when I was behind the dugout.
Yeah.
And the dugout all of a sudden started a lot of expletives, right? So expletives. But thank you very much. Fans like you and the support you've given us over the years and your feel for the old ballpark has just been really special.
I love the Rangers, John. I do. This has been your Dark Companion. Thank you, Shoopy. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, Mickey. Thank you for watching. Tell your friends about it. Sign up on Patreon. Get on board here with us, because we do stuff like this and we have fun. Next time.
All right. I'm going to go take my pants off.
Your Dark Companion is a Stolen Water Media presentation.